is after 8 and I am officially starting this. Welcome everybody to good morning, konbanwa, and guten tag to everybody, Erica Friedman, as you know, and welcome to the Yuricon 20th anniversary discussion. Today we're going to be talking about global Yuri fandom. I want to thank you all very much, and particularly those of you on the East and, well, in the US at all. If you're on the West Coast, less. I really want to thank you all, for those of you whose time zone makes it rather early. I'm expecting that you all are familiar with Zoom right now, but if you're not, just in case, I'm going to go over some basics. Please make sure you have hit the microphone button so that you're muted when you are not talking. That's really important. I know there's background noises and whatever, but we all have computers and they all will bang noises around. So please keep yourself muted when you're not talking. And there is a chat, and we do have someone monitoring the chat, but I will keep an eye on the chat. If I miss your question, repost it and I'll be glad to try to catch you later. So November of this year marks the 20th anniversary of the Yuricon Community online, and I'll be talking about that in my presentation. But as you may know, this year also marked the first ever Yuri focus panel at Mechademia, at which I was joined by our panelists today, James Welker and Verena Maser. And we had so much fun at Mechademia. We had so little time that we wanted to do it all over again. So that was something that I asked, and they very graciously offered their time today. So they're coming back to do this all over again. We're going to do this a little differently than presentations are. What we're going to do is have James is going to do his presentation, and then we'll give a few minutes for like presentation specific questions. And then Verena will do hers, and we'll do the same. And then me and I'll do my same. And then we're going to open it up to community discussion and chit chat, and we'll answer questions. And we have plenty of time today. So if you don't get in, just again, repost your question. And I guess we're going to get started. So James, I'm going to make you a host here for a moment.
Okay. And
allow you to, I'm changing the host to you, and you are welcome to start your presentation up.
It's still saying I'm not allowed to share. Did you change it to the iPad or the Mac?
Oh, whoops.
See, that's why I needed to name them.
See, you did. All right, let me reclaim my hostum. Now I have to find where that is now. Okay, this could be annoying. You give me my hostum back.
Okay, or I can.
Yeah, name your iPad your Mac. Yeah.
What do I do? Oh crap! Sorry,
No, it's okay. When it was just two of us, I had no trouble doing this.
It's just my eyes are old.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. It's kind of weird that I can't claim my hostum back, which I could yesterday.
I don't know why. Yeah, this just gives me. I don't know why it's not giving me the option. And it's. Oh, I know why. That's why. There you go.
Okay, so now I can give the other one hostum?
Yeah, or you can just co-host it or something.
It doesn't allow me to co-host.
Okay.
So I'm gonna make this one a host. You'll have to give it back.
Well, now that I know how.
Okay. All right, there you go.
There we go. Brilliant. Sorry about all of that. We did not do a practice run, as you can tell.
No, we didn't. The technical difficulties portion of all events.
So thank you, first of all, Erica, for allowing me to do this. This is really exciting. I started trying to do some research on Yuri. God, when was this? A bazillion years ago. and like in the early first decade of the 2000s. And then soon thereafter, I was at University of Illinois, and Erica came to give a talk. She was invited to give a talk on Yuri, and that's where we met. And we've been virtually or realistically or in person hanging out ever since, and we've been communicating. So it's really exciting to be part of something that's been going on so long. So I have in front of me like the scripts from the actual paper that I gave at Mechademia, and instead of reading it, I'm just going to look down and try to hope that it refreshes my memory about the kind of stuff that I was going to say, sort of like a halfway between a con panel and a an academic panel. So first of all, I want to say, again, thanks to everybody for coming and listening. What I'm talking about today comes from research that I have in the process of doing with Professor Fujimoto, who is here, and a few other scholars, all based in Japan, using money from what we call in Japanese kakenhi, or grants and aid for scientific research from the Japan Association for the Promotion of Science or something like that. I can't remember the English name. It's important that I acknowledge the generous funding that is paid for this research. This project that we're doing is basically we're looking at intersections between BL. So boy, everybody knows all of the words, right? BL and Yuri and yaoi and shonen ai. I don't have to define words, right? Between BL, Yuri, trans representation or trans manga, if such a genre exists, and then LGBTQ cultures around the world. And so the very generous money that we've gotten from the government, we've been using to travel to different events in various countries, various continents, until the pandemic shut us down. And so this is where this RIDIA or this comes from. So we have been going to these different events, and when we're there, we if we're going to be like formal, we're doing visual surveys, collecting materials. So basically buying doujinshi and stickers and prints and badges and all sorts of other fun things. And doing interviews, often really informal interviews, just chatting with people at booths and so forth. And one of the things that I love about this is everybody loves their fandom, and pretty much everybody is excited to talk to researchers. They're happy that researchers are interested, and they've responded really, really positively. Another thing that I want to point out before I forget, it might come up later, but before I forget, is one of the cool things about East Asia. I don't speak Korean, I don't speak Chinese, but when we went to Korea and when we went to Taiwan, lots of manga fans speak Japanese. And so if somebody didn't speak English, we could communicate in Japanese, which was really cool. And if they didn't speak English or Japanese, the person at the next booth did. I've never had trouble communicating with people because there was always somebody at the next booth who could interpret. So we went to these events, again, visual surveys, trying to judge how many people, what's the composition of people in terms of age and gender and so forth, to the extent that you can kind of judge that. We also went to bookshops, and again, just kind of doing visual surveys, and if we could do it without getting caught, taking photos of bookshelves so we'd have like something for reference later. The other thing that we did while we were there was trying, whenever possible, one of us at least, or multiple of us, would give talks either at a convention. So I've given talks in Mexico, a Mexican fan convention, or at universities. So like in Seoul and Taipei, we gave talks at universities, and I'm forgetting others because I'm not looking at my thing, my list. But so basically, myself, I've gone to conventions for this project in Canada, Mexico, the US, France, Korea, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Thailand. And we were planning on going to Brazil, France, and Germany, but all of that got cut off because of the pandemic. Yeah, Serena writes, wow, the Philippines. I've been multiple times. They have amazing events. You all have to go to events in the Philippines. They're just amazing. What I want to talk about is some just general observations that I have made from going to all of these events. And a lot of these observations, I've got like 3 observations, if I can find them all in my notes. These observations, if you're a fan and if you've been going to conventions, even in one country, but if you've gone in multiple countries, they might seem obvious. Well, you know, they do kind of seem pretty obvious, but one of the points of this research is to either confirm this kind of common knowledge that fans have, or to maybe find out what's not actually true. Everybody knows blah, blah, blah. Well, actually, you know, to try to figure out what's true. Now, this is a panel about Yuri, and I'm the first speaker, and I'm really sorry that my first observation is that BL continues to dominate the fandoms. Like all of the fandoms, if we're looking at any sort of queer representation in manga, and of course anime and so on, BL is is dominant. But so that's my first observation. But one of the things that makes it difficult then to do research on Yuri is, in Yuri fandom, is that when you go to events, if you want to see Yuri, there are very few events where they're just Yuri. You got to go to BL events and then find that little niche, that little corner somewhere to find the Yuri, right? You can't, or you go to even bigger events and then it's an even smaller corner, or it feels like an even smaller corner, to find Yuri and Yuri fans. So that's the one of the issues. But that brings me to my second observation, is that BL and Yuri overlap significantly, right? In terms of fans, in terms of fan spaces. I have been friends with Erica for a very long time. I think she's read a little bit of BL, but she's never mentioned being particularly thrilled with BL. But I know a lot of Yuri fans who also love BL, right? And a lot of, you know, if you're looking at the content, there's a lot of similarities in some cases. So when you go to fan events, that's the case. If you go to, I've actually been skipping my slides, so I should, my original thing was in color. So this is this is the a Yuri event, actually, a specific event in Taipei in 2019. And so this is an example of the kinds of events we're going to. This is taken with a wide angle lens, so it's not quite this big, but it really was quite big. And this is an example of a bookstore. So this is Animate in Bangkok. And this is one of 2 spots where there's a lot of BL. And if you, whoops, okay, I didn't do anything. Sorry, I've got 2 different devices going on, and I turned off my camera, that's what I did. So if you look over here, this far bookshelf here, that is the Yuri, right? So all the rest, this is BL, and there's a whole other section that's got more BL up in the front in the new releases. However, based on what I've seen, that's a lot of Yuri relative to BL. Just a quarter of it being Yuri is pretty impressive. Not all of it is manga. Some of it is novels. Some of it's fiction, but that's also true in the BL side. But when BL and Yuri or when you can find Yuri, it's almost always at a bookstore. And then another thing. So here's another example. So when I was at a conference in Montreal, I picked up this Le Japonais du Manga, which was published in France in 2015. This was in 2019 that I bought this book. And Erica was there actually at the time. And let me see if I can find the, sorry, I've lost my, okay, so, this volume actually has 4 entries that cover BL. There are 4 entries, four entries that cover BL. So it's Boizurabu, Yaoi, Fujoshi, and then in the entry for Yaoi, there it says it's the counterpart of yaoi is Yuri. That's it. Like that's the whole thing. But there's long entries in this. So where are we at here? And then like even if you look at, in the case of Japan, if you look at BL magazines, the beginning of the, or not BL, if you look at Yuri magazines, the early Yuri magazines, the first ones were published by the same publisher as June, which is a BL magazine. If you look at these, most of the ads in the first couple years, they were for BL. So like there's this assumption that it's the same readers. There's an assumption that there's this overlapping interest. And also, I guess, advertising your own publications is free. So there is that. One of the things about Japan that's kind of interesting is we've got this culture of only events, or in Japanese, they're literally called only ibento. And because we have this culture of only events, you get the, you have, this is why I read a script, by the way, normally. But because we have only events, like you really can go to events and they will be only Yuri. That's it. It's just Yuri only. But when you go to these other events that I was talking about, you know, it's going to be a mix of Yuri and BL. And again, Yuri is going to be this little thing. This event that I showed you before at the beginning in Taiwan, and then there was another event in Seoul that I went to. These are definitely exceptions. And if you go to an event like J Garden, which is a June, the J is for June, so this is a BL event. You aren't going to find any examples of Yuri. Now, I haven't been recently, and in the past like 5 or 7 years, myotaika, or like female bodying, like making characters into male-bodied characters into female bodies, that has been popular, and sometimes that turns BL into Yuri-like situations, but it also sometimes just turns BL into more heterosexual situations because only one character is myotaikad. I guess that would be the word. And then if you go to, this is an event that we were hoping to go to. This is Sala Shonenai, or Shoujo-ai, which is part of a larger event in Sao Paulo. It's mixing together. This is also a really good example of how older labels are still being used in some cultures, like Shonenai and Shoujo-ai. Shonenai is the old word for BL. Shoujo-ai was sort of invented in fandom outside of Japan. Both of these words are really problematic, but Shoujo-ai particularly problematic because they both sort of point to pedophilia.
And I'll talk about that in my presentation.
There you go.
And so we'll cover that there, yeah.
Yeah. But other events that I've gone to include like Doki Doki City. This is from 2018. I've gone 2018, 2019, and Doki Doki City is primarily a BL event, although they use the word yaoi, BL. They have what in English and other languages is often called bara. In Japanese, it's just called gay comics or gay komi. But if you go, there will be a significant amount of a significant amount of tables that are Yuri, and you'll find Yuri fans, or you'll find tables, the publishers that mix, or circles that have Yuri and sometimes trans stories and so forth. Here's another example. This is an event that doesn't happen anymore, but this was room 801. And many of you might know that 801 is code for yaoi because of the way you can read numbers in Japanese. So it's really room yaoi. That's why August 1st is BL Day, or Yaoi Day, because 801 is read this way. And this is tagged as a BL event, but you can see from the back cover of the catalog, there's this. It's also there's Yuri and stuff like that. here is Oops Summerfest, which is this paddle is probably from 2018, although Professor Fujimoto and I went in 2019. And this is an interesting event. It started out, was founded by a non-binary, huge fan of BL and K-pop, and they they were actually interested in making a BL event, but they thought, because Monterey is near the US, they thought it would be important to cater to fans of DC and Marvel, and maybe they should just make it an LGBT comics event. And so that's what they did. But if you go, it's a lot of BL. It's a lot of BL. And here's another, here's for Serena again. So this is Comiket. Comiket is another, it's a Filipino event, and this particular one was LGBT themed, or LGBTQ plus themed, I think they had in the catalog. And this brings me to another point, which is when you go to these events, or when you're looking for Yuri, a lot of times what the manga that you can get and the stuff that I bought at this event, you could call it Yuri if you want to, and I'm sure that Erica would, but it's lesbian, and they're using lesbian identitarian labels, and you can put that within in a really broadly defined Yuri, but it's not the same thing as fantasies of schoolgirls that's far removed from reality, which is sort of where a lot of the Yuri a lot of the Yuri was created. So here's an example. This is from the catalog, or not the catalog. This is an anthology that they had from this. You can see they're using pride language and so forth, which you don't normally see in typical Yuri from Japan. Here are some stickers, and you can see lots of references to contemporary pride and queer cultures and so forth. And I do not, I've thrown away my scripts, and I don't remember why I wanted to talk about Sailor Moon, but oh, Sailor Moon crossover fandom. I knew it. So the reason I was bringing up Sailor Moon is just one of the cool things about Yuri that's true in and outside of Japan is that the fan base is a lot broader than for BL inside Japan. Inside Japan, BL fans are still primarily cisgender women, primarily heterosexual women. There are queer women, there are gay men, there are trans fans of BL, but Yuri has is a broader fan base. And this is, a lot of this sort of came together around fandom of Sailor Moon. And so although some people if you go to an event in Japan, you might get the impression that there are a lot of men everywhere. There are a lot of male fans. Actually, I have somewhere in these pages the percentages that I observed when I was like sort of doing head counts. It's not quite this many men, and the circles themselves are a good mix of women and men. Again, the fandom is really super crossover. And I had surveys from that. Okay, so this is where I wanted to kind of problematize what I said earlier. So I said that this stuff is lesbian and this stuff is Yuri. And then even in Japan, you find things like the Erotica, which is touting itself as the original lesbian erotica, but they're using Yuri symbolism, and they have tables at Yuri events. And so, maybe, as rigid as I want to be about like, this is some sort of attempting realism and lesbian pride, maybe the definition isn't quite as clear as that. And okay, this is a poster for Comic Horizon, which is in Taipei. Let me see if okay. So in Seoul, I guess maybe I can sort of end with talking about Seoul. The Seoul event, I couldn't really get a good idea of who was there, because this was the very beginning of the pandemic and everybody was wearing masks and everybody was wearing winter coats because it was February in an unheated hall. And we weren't allowed to take pictures. I may or may not have surreptitiously taken a few, but in the interest of privacy, I will not be sharing them if I did. which I'm not saying I did. But at this event, there was at least, there seemed to be a good mix of male and female fans, but the circles, most of the majority of the tables seem to be female tables. And then that kind of brings back, so what kind of Yuri can you find? And you could find very, very Japan inspired Yuri, very kind of the fantasy, the schoolgirl fantasy crushes and so forth. But you could also find more realistic, I don't read Korean, so I don't, and I haven't had any of this translated yet, but you can also find works like this that just seem to be about everyday life for lesbian identified women. And yeah, there's Erica. I think I'm gonna stop. So, and I need to make Erica the host again. If I can find her. Host. There we go. All right, there you go. You're free, and I'll shut up.
All right. All right. Well, thank you very much, James. So I had a couple of questions right away, and if anybody has any questions, do jump them into, either raise your hand or jump them into the comments. I had a question though. When you say that people are happy to speak to researchers, what do you do? Like walk up and go, "Hi, I'm a researcher." Like,
yes.
how do you initiate conversations with folks?
I take my cards that identify myself as a professor, and I say, "Hi." Well, first of all, outside of the events that I went to in Toronto and Montreal, I'm usually one of the only like native white looking cisgender dudes at these events. Like even at the BL events, there's a lot more male fans at BL events outside of Japan than inside Japan. There are some, but anyway, I stand out. Like so much so that people usually remember me year to year. Like in the Philippines and Mexico, where I've gone to events multiple times and multiple different events, they're like, "Oh, I remember you." So, but it's usually people they love talking about what they're doing, and you know, they want to help. I haven't had a chance to, I'm not sure if I'm going to do interviews or surveys. We've done as part of the larger research group, my colleagues, several of my colleagues have conducted an online survey of BL fans, female identified BL fans, as well as gay male identified BL fans. Unfortunately, we haven't done Yuri because it's a smaller genre, and but people seem to love to help and they want to participate. Yes, please. Yeah, they want to share their knowledge and like their experiences. Right.
And have you seen, like you're talking about what you're talking about, like a line between Yuri and lesbian content, and I'll actually talk about that in my presentation because that's like 98% of my presentation is. Are you seeing more of like lesbian content over time, or is it just in various spaces? Like is it more outside Japan generally?
It would be hard for me to say over time because this particular project started, like the first event that I went overseas was in 2018. And so basically it all stopped in 2020.
2 of them are being a pandemic. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I ask, like, one of the things that I do is if I'm buying something is I ask, do you call this Yuri or do you call this lesbian? Right. And a lot of times they're like, well, you could call it Yuri if you want, or, you know, but I mean, some of it really is obvious. It's attempting to realistically depict women who love women. In a non-fantasy way. I guess or a realistic fantasy.
Yeah, the other side of that is, do you ever ask folks doing obviously Yuri if it's lesbian?
I have not, and that's a really good question.
Yeah, that's I think the more interesting question. Okay, we have a question here from Sarah. How are things like the taika material viewed transnationally in Asia outside Japan? Is there trans fandom of those materials anywhere?
So Nyotaika, I saw some in Mexico. And where else have I seen it? I can't remember if I've seen it in the Philippines. I've seen a little bit of it, but usually it's the stuff that I've seen has been at Comiket in Japan. I've seen it, like a bunch of it was like the year after Yuri on Ice came out, like everybody was Nyotaikaing the
Yeah.
Yuri on Ice. But I don't know
Verena
enough.
stands.
Yeah, but as far as if there's trans fans or not, that's a really good question. And I've been super interested in trans fandom of all of this queer media. And because there's less Yuri, it's hard for me to get much of a sense. But if you go to any of these events, you meet so many gender non-conforming people. And I'm not walking up and asking, like, do you identify as a man or a woman? I mean, I might in a survey if I'm asking, but I'm not going to randomly walk up to somebody and ask.
It's not done in public, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, why would I? It's like, I mean, unless somebody consents to an interview. But I think that all of these genres, because of the gender bending nature, and because a lot of the fans, particularly in the last couple decades, have just been welcoming and warm to a variety of people, I think that it makes a nice space. I mean, if you think about like the earliest, like a lot back when BL in Japan was the main genre and there was very little of what you might now call Yuri, there were a lot of lesbians who read that because like that was the closest they could come. And there are people who later identified as trans, or in Japanese, there's an identity called X gender, which is something like non-binary. I think just in general, I don't know that there are fans of Nyotaika specifically who are trans. I mean, that's their main genre or something like that.
We have one more question. This is from Sarah Herendin, and I apologize. If one of the main identifiers of the Yuri genre is it being more fantasy-like, is it mostly geared towards male eye, or is there Yuri fantasy geared towards queer women, or would that fall under lesbian? And actually, I think, Sarah, that's a really good question. And I want to circle back later to talk about it in a more general conversation. But what do you think, James, on that? Do you think that there's a gender of the fandom of the Yuri fantasy versus lesbian fantasy?
And Yuri, Nikki says that she loves that question. It is a great question. I was almost going to kick it to you, Erica, but there's such a wide variety of Yuri, and it's created by such a wide variety of artists. That again, in Japan, BL is primarily created by and for cisgender heterosexual or heterosexual appearing women, whereas Yuri is so much more diverse. And then some of the stuff that you think is catered towards a male gaze, that's actually the stuff that the female fans love, that they want the really porny, sexy stuff. And some of the male fans, Erica and Patty's dear late friend Bruce, who, I talked to him over drinks at an izakaya a number of years ago, and he really loves the sweet, the romantic stories. He didn't want any of the porny stuff, or at least that's what he told me. And I think, I don't know. But some people, it's just an escape into romance then. And then it's,
I would say that it absolutely depends on the person, and also the creative intent. In that case, I mean, I think you get a lot of play over the fact that Yuri is so heterogeneous. So you've got men and women creating it for men and women, and different age groups and different things. So yeah, I mean, it seems obvious to me that you're going to get, you know, I have porn in my collection that I like a lot. And I also have stuff that is super sweet romance and absolutely, you know, completely innocent. And I'm going to like both of them for varying reasons over varying things. And I think almost everybody has that. Like if you look at your collection, everybody on the shelf, you're going to go, okay, yeah, that was the first thing I read. And now I would look at it and go, ugh. You know, because our collections change over time too. So somebody was saying, Yuri Mother says there was an English survey over a couple of years ago, and I think it was only about 30 to 40% of male readers say they read it for sexual pleasure. The thing about surveys too is everybody who does surveys know that people lie on surveys. I work in a scientific background and industry, and people lie on surveys because they say what they think the surveyors want to hear. So there's a certain amount of wiggle room on that as well. Okay, Verena, I am going to
Yes.
turn this over to you.
Yeah.
And we will let you. I wonder why it doesn't let me. Oh, whatever. I'll just
I
make you.
don't think I need to be the host for me to share my screen. Oh no.
Okay, here we go. Wait a
Oh.
second. Ta-da! That should be it. I think I clicked the right button. So why don't you go ahead and share your screen?
Yeah, it's working. Yay.
Okay.
Okay, so
right.
yes, this is also like, first of all, thank you all for coming. Like, it's great that you're all here, especially when it's really early where you are right now, or very late. And yeah, so I'm going to do a quicker version of my Mechademia presentation, and I'm going to show you a bit about the market for Yuri manga in Germany and how it has developed over time. And well, as you know, I'm a researcher of Yuri, I'm a fan of Yuri, and what you may not know is that I'm also a translator of Yuri and also some BL actually. So triple perspective in this case. So first of all, a bit of numbers about manga in Germany. This is an overview from 2009 to 2019, although the first manga published in German was early 90s, I think, and the market took off in the late 90s with Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon and stuff. And ever since, it has been going up. And as you can see, during COVID last year, we had a super large jump from 1,099 to 1,532 titles published in 1 year. So, and it doesn't look like it's going to be less this year. So we're going to see where that ends up for us translators and also for the fans. And what you can see also from the numbers is that BL as a genre has been fairly stable over time. The very first BL was published, I think, in 2000. And the numbers have been like this most of the time, I think. And you can also see that shonen and shoujo are the two big genres that dominate the market, shonen even more so in recent years. And as you can see, Yuri is rather small, so I've enhanced that a bit from 2005 to, well, this year is an estimate because the year is not over yet and we don't know all the titles yet that are going to come out. And I think what you can see is that there are 3 waves that I've called like this. I don't know whether those waves will still exist when I look back in 5 years, but for now, this is what the picture is for me. So first of all, we have this first wave that starts around 2008 with the publication of Girls Love, very innovative title, super German publishers, I love you. In Japanese, this was called Shoujo Bigaku, so girls aesthetics, which is also not a great title, really. It's by Chiran, and it's an anthology, so several short stories. And this was really the first time that a manga that was published as Yuri in Japan was translated into German. So this marks for me the first wave of Yuri manga in Germany. And then we see, well, it didn't really take off. And then in 2015 came Citrus, which so happens to be my series as a translator. And Citrus was hugely, or is still hugely successful. Nobody really knows why, but in 2015, when the first volume came out, it reached spot number 16 in the manga top 100 of that year, and no Yuri manga has managed to beat that yet. So we can see that it really was super successful and is still. So we are at spin-off volume number 3, I think, and it's still selling very well. And then in 2018 starts what I would call the big wave or something. It's often not a very innovative title, might change later on. But that was the first time that the German publishers decided, okay, girls' love, as they call it, has become so important. We need a special label for that. So to know that as a background, in 2007 or so, 2008 maybe, the German publishers came together and said, okay, we have so many manga that have been published, and we have so many bookstores that are confused as to what is what and what they can sell and what people want. We are going to come up with several genre categories. So that includes, I think, fantasy and science fiction and adventure and romance and boys' love. And until 2018, Yuri manga were published as romance and were thus also quite hard to find if you were looking for them. And in 2018, they said, okay, you know what, this genre is not big enough. We're going to give it its category of its own. So since 2018, all the Yuri manga are available under the label Girls Love. Not necessarily in every bookstore, but in theory, at least. So question is, why this up and down of numbers we have seen? It's like, well, mountain climbing up and down. So as we have seen earlier, Boys Love was very successful and also very stable in terms of numbers. And Yuri was perceived, when I spoke to several people from the publishing industry, it's like a niche or maybe an add-on, nice to have, but not something that you have to cater to as a publisher. And the audience demand, I think, was there when I started research in 2000, I think 8, 9, 10 around. But I think what was a problem was to find compatible content. So readers were used to a rather, I would say, liberal attitude towards homosexuality. So they were also used to American TV series, like, let's say, Buffy or The L Word. And I think that many Yuri manga, at least at the time, were a bit more conservative and also demanded a lot more imagination from their audiences. And a case in point, I think, is Maria-sama ga Miteru. This is the cover for the German version of the first volume of the novel.
Yeah, and the chat is sitting there being very jealous of it. I just want to say, we're all very jealous of you having that.
Yeah, I know. It was hard to find, actually, at the time already. Yeah, so as we all know, Maria-sama ga Miteru is great, but it's not really like a love story or something. We don't see a lot of kissing or making out or stuff like that. And so unfortunately, Maria-sama ga Miteru had to cease publication after 5 novel volumes in German. And like the manga came out in its totality, but was also not like a huge success, and the anime never made it over. So maybe it will now as, I don't know, retro. But yeah, for now, it's just not something that people here were very interested in. So question becomes, of course, okay, what do fans want? And if we look at Citrus and why it became successful, I think we can speculate a bit. So I would say what we can see in Citrus is that it has a pretty art style. It is sexy, but not overly revealing. It has recognizable characters. It has a bit of comedy. It has a nice pacing that is neither too fast nor too slow. And well, I know the story is problematic, but all in all, it's a nice package, really. And Citrus also managed to attract a significant amount of, well, male readers, says Tokyopop as the publisher. And well, it helped really expand that market for Yuri manga in Germany, and thus helped the publishers also to cater to different interests. So what James also just said, that male readers do not necessarily read Yuri manga to see sexy time, as Tokyopop Germany calls it. And it also helped like to publish well, identity issue focused titles, although I'm not really sure in which of those two categories Citrus falls. I would maybe say it's rather sexy time, because identity issues aren't really a problem in the manga, but I don't know, maybe you have a different opinion on that. Or maybe we can say maybe it's even a combination of those two categories. Yeah, and then I'm coming to my daytime job. As I said, I'm doing translations too of manga, and also of Yuri manga, not just of Citrus, but also of Yuri is My Job by Viman. And it's a title that I love very dearly, but it's also a title that shows me again and again that it's very hard to translate Yuri manga into German, because you have a problem in that the German audience is not able to discern certain tropes. So in Japan, the history of Yuri goes back to the beginning of the 20th century, essentially. And Japanese readers are reminded of that again and again. And also Japanese Yuri publications remind their readers of this history again and again. And well, in Germany, we don't have the tradition. We don't have a long tradition of girl-girl romances. And we also don't have magazines that remind our readers that this tradition exists. So yeah, things will get lost in translation, unfortunately. This is an example from Yuri is My Job, which is a reference to Maria-sama ga Miteru. So in the very first episode, the very first chapter of Maria-sama ga Miteru, there's a very famous scene between the two main characters, where Sachiko says to Yumi, well, tai ga magatti deyo, so your tie is warped, and then she reties it, and that's just like the beginning of that sort of romance, not really romance, but that relationship between the two of them. And in Yuri is My Job, we have an exact citation of that scene. And I can translate it by word for word. And I know that it's a reference to Maria-sama ga Miteru, but I'm fairly certain that my audience doesn't know it. And that is very, very sad. But I can't change it, unfortunately. And something else that gets lost, I know Erica loves this slide, is the flower lily itself. So in Germany, the lily is associated, I don't know, with grief, with graveyards at best, I would say, but it's not associated with love between girls. Whereas in Japan, that association, by now at least, is rather strict, and especially when you have a manga that is catered towards Yuri readers, they will know that the lily. German readers will look at it and say, well, is that a banana? Or I don't know. It doesn't really look like lily if you zoom in at 300%. And so that is also very unfortunate that most German readers will not see it as a symbol for girls' love. And yeah, that's stuff that gets lost, unfortunately. And finally, also, like, feelings tend to get lost, or maybe ambiguity, I would say, gets lost. So in Japanese, we have this very nice word that's ski, which is something like, I care for you, I like you, I love you. All of these complicated feelings put into one word, and like, it's up to you to interpret what's really going on. And unfortunately, German is not that ambiguous when it comes to expressing feelings, or maybe you could say Germans have a hard time to express their feelings at all. And so for me as a translator, I constantly have to try and interpret, okay, at what stage in that relationship are we in this volume right now, and hoping that later volumes won't contradict my interpretation at that moment. So in this instance in Citrus, I went for having a crush because I thought that was appropriate. I still think it's appropriate, but it's hard to judge because sometimes they also like jump between having a crush, being in love, I don't know, something in between. And that's, yeah, I don't like that aspect of my job, actually. That's like the hardest part of translating Yuri manga for me, and it's a struggle every time. And for this reason, I almost prefer collections of short stories, because then you don't really have to care what happens later on in the story. Yeah, and I think that's my presentation. I thank you all for listening, and hopefully you will have some questions.
Thank you so much, Verena. Hang on, Nikki, I just have one question for myself. So Yuri is My Job is a terrific series, and I also absolutely adore it. But I think there's a thing I want to know about it specifically. So in Maria Samagameteru, the foreignness that the school has is French, so they are sur.
Mm-hmm.
And in Watashi no Yuri wa Oshigoto desu, the story is transported to a Germanish sort of situation. And I want to know, does it present any complicating factors to translate Japanese that uses German-esque language and situations Schwestern instead of sur back into German, and make it make sense as being foreign and exotic?
Yeah, it was a challenge in the first volume, but I'm very fortunate because my editor accepted my suggestion to put the German word to keep the German words that are used in the original version as katakana, so you know they're German.
Okay.
And in the German version, we use them in a special font that looks like old-time German, so to speak, like a bit cliche, I think, but it works. And also, like when they're working in the cafe, I'm trying to give them a very like old-time German way of speaking, really. So I try to differentiate that, and I hope it's working. I'm not really sure.
Okay, and you haven't gotten any feedback, negative or positive, from the fandom?
No, I just know the numbers, how it's selling. So I know it's not selling really bad, but also not super good. So I think it's okay-ish in the middle between. Yeah.
All right. Well, if anybody knows anybody in German, tell them to read it, because it's really a fantastic series. So, Nikki, you have a question. Do you want to?
Actually, you took my original question, which was about the German in Yuri is My Job. But I do have another one. So at the very beginning, you kind of showed how we have these waves of Yuri, and there's the big wave, and then also right before that, you showed this huge jump of, I think it was 1,500 titles this COVID year. Are we seeing more Yuri in that? Because I know a lot of the series that you've talked about have been published in Germany for a couple of years. At least I know that's the case with Citrus.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was a bit surprised that the estimation of Yuri titles for 2021 was a bit lower than last year. So I'm hoping that we're seeing a lot of titles coming at the end of this year. Maybe it's because in 2018-19 there was also a new publisher that came onto the market, which had, I think, 3 or 4 Yuri titles or Yuri series in their lineup, but I think they've now all been published in their completeness. So I'm trying to think which huge titles we're still missing, and the only things that I'm coming up with is Aoi Hana and Sasameki Koto, which are really old now that I think of it.
Now they're old, yeah.
Yeah. But like I don't know, like I think we should see more titles, but for some reason, I don't know, it's a bit slow this year. It's not
Yeah,
because there
somebody
was
was
a few
asking
fans.
if you had any insights to why there's been a decrease in new Yuri licenses, but you know,
I can just guess, like
yes, right.
maybe they're not seeing stuff they want to publish. Maybe there are not enough fans that are demanding a certain series. Maybe they're trying to get even more isekai. I don't know.
Somebody was asking, Patty's asking, did Germany get My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness by the Nagata copy? So you did, okay.
We did, yeah. I think we're still missing out on the newest 2 volumes, like the one with the wedding and the one before that.
Yeah, the Meso Senshi series, but that's all brand new, right? So
Yeah,
that only just came out here.
Yeah.
So Sarah has a question. She has a citrus question. She gets okay, so I think Sarah, again, this is really more of a general question, which she's talking about the toxicity of citrus, and I'm gonna hold on to this, Sarah. Could you ask this again when I'm done with my presentation? Because this is sort of a general question about whether Yuri has a responsibility to queer readers to show healthier relationships or address it in a constructive way, because I actually think that has a lot to do with the function of fiction. And so if you would ask that again, Sarah, I appreciate it. Let me do my presentation.
Okay.
And then we'll get that. So thank you very much, Verena. That was awesome. I really appreciate that. Yay, pachi, pachi, pachi. Okay. Okay, so here we are. I'm going to actually close this down so there's only me here. All right. So my presentation is about the words used to describe Yuri. And in this particular case, what I'm doing is I'm tracing over the past 20 plus years how global Yuri fandom has spoken about itself and has been spoken about, and what words are being used. So let me just see if I can get this to work here. Okay, so my background really quick is that I say that the global history of global Yuri fandom began with the internet, which is a pretty broad statement, but it seems ridiculous to say that nobody was a fan of Yuri until the internet existed. But that's exactly what I'm saying, because until we had a fandom, we didn't have the word Yuri, and we didn't have the fandom of Yuri manga. So it's obvious to any even casual researcher or scholar that pop culture has always had some kind of fandom even before the internet. The first Star Trek convention was in 1972. Before the internet, before IRC or AOL or even Prodigy Chat, there were school AV clubs. There were laser discs being imported from Japan, and people would get together with other like-minded folks in closets that were the AV club room. And if you were on the AV club, you totally know what I mean. And some of those AV clubs spawned anime groups, and then where people would sit around and watch that. It probably won't come as any surprise to anybody listening that I was a member of my school's AV club some years, sadly, before the anime became available. So what happened was these clubs encouraged creation of derivative work and provided technology for fan titles and dubbing. The first known fan sub was in 1986. It was done on a Commodore Amiga by the Cartoon Fantasy Organization. And these groups of technology enthusiasts in colleges or school settings had memberships comprised of mostly white, cis, straight, men. Not that women and LGBTQ folks and when people of color were non-existent, but relatively rare. And anime with gay plots didn't exist really, except for porn sometimes included lesbian scenes. Cream Lemon is a famous pornographic series of shorts, and it has multiple episodes that include or feature lesbian sex, which rely on a lot of the same early 20th century tropes as Maria Sama ga Mithuru and Here Is My Job, and that there's a 3 lesbian episode arc called Cream Lemon Escalation. So this arc was inspired by those early aesthetics, and the stories of aesthetics tended to be based in platonic love, and here was turned into an explicit porn anime complete with BDSM and group sex, and it is actually quite funny and interesting. Anecdotally, this is the origin of the term lemon in Western anime fan fiction to indicate explicit sexual content. The first queer anime I ever saw was 1992's I No Kusabi at a late night 18+ room in a local con. And a lot of times there were lesbian scenes in straight hentai at the time, and that was considered okazu. It was the appetizer before the main course of the sex, which of course is where I got the name of my blog, Okazu, because Okazu is also little small dishes. And so I was giving little tidbits of information and news and also about lesbians. So therefore Okazu. So nonetheless, by the mid 1990s, viewers could look for queer content in anime. They could enjoy yaoi anime such as Gravitation and Fake. Fans of Yuri would have to be content with parsing the subtext of popular series for girls with cross-dressing or masculine coded girl prince characters until the 1999 hit Revolution Girl Utena. Utena took the girl prince trope, and I'm going to read this line out because it's a great line and I want everyone to read this. Utena took the girl prince trope and built an entire series upon that foundation, coded it in a story of obsession, dredged it through a light layer of S, rolled it in a crispy outer coating of references from classic anime and manga before it, and then sprinkled it liberally with all over with BL and Yuri themes, character situations, and scenes, providing this still developing queer fandom with a delicious treat. It's a good line, and I wanted to make sure it got on tape. As the means by which imported media could be watched transitioned from expensive laser discs to commercially available VHS tapes, the conversation about this newly accessible medium moved out of school-based anime groups into more geographically and socially diverse online platforms. So now that we had eaten of these delicious forbidden fruits, we all jumped online to talk about them. Online in the 1990s meant platforms that were adjacent to the internet, usually like Usenet. Usenet was one of the first platforms to become a global home to anime fandoms. Rec Arts Anime was a major gathering point, and we had a lot of alt fan hierarchy groups, including the alt fan Sailor Moon group, which is where we started conversing originally about Yuri. And predictably, Western anime fandom defaulted to using Japanese terms. And I want to just mention this because this ties into some stuff that both James and Verena were talking about, that Western anime fandom is using Japanese terms to create in group jargon because it's exotic and cool, and it creates an us and them. So where female fans of anime and manga were simultaneously discovering what was now called boys love, we were talking about girls love, and we didn't really yet have terms. So what happened was, by the time Cardcaptor Sakura made it to our Western shores, female fans of magical girls series were creating this identity for themselves, and some of them who primarily American fans were looking for a rating system. So there's a very specific group of people. By 1999, we're talking about yaoi, which was porn, and shonenai, which was romance. And not surprisingly, at the same time, we had this artificial distinction of yuri being porn and shoujoai being romance. And so that has actually lingered for a really long time, and it is a very problematic term because of its connotations, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Fandom was also using the term lemon, and equally as predictably created Lime to be more like PG. So it's sort of a pretty common sort of like, once we have a word, we have to sort of separate it out so everyone knows what we're looking at. Shoujoi, or shoujoi variant in 2 words, is a word that I was using on my own sites in 2000. And it was the first word we had colloquially to describe what was called femslash in Western anime fandoms. I'm sorry, Western fandoms. As shoujoi fandom gets larger, we need spaces for ourselves. And so we started creating our own groups, and we had mailing lists. Philip Mack's Shoujoi archive was our first only just for this space online. And a toast to Philip for his work. But by then, we were starting to realize that shoujoi was problematic. Shonenai and shoujoi were terms that were being used in Japan, but not by anime fans. They have connotations of pedophilia, and I particularly wanted to divorce the content that I was enjoying from any connotation of pederasty. So I did some research, which is my default behavior since I'm a researcher, and I learned of Ito Bunkaku's coining of Yurizoku in Barozoku magazine. So at the time in the mid 70s, he felt that lesbians needed their own space, to carve out a small space for them for letters to other women who were reading his magazine. And I knew that it had already been appropriated by pornographers, but I felt that it was time to reclaim it. So I started using the word Yuri. So, which is why actually we're here today, because in 2001, I had a group called the Ana Lesbocon mailing list on Yahoo Groups. And sorry, let me go back one more second. And in 2001, Yahoo started purging the mailing lists, and among them was the Ana Lesbocon group. They started purging anything that was Yuri or queer related, or anything that maybe sort of vaguely they felt was a little inappropriate, much like LiveJournal had done just before them. And so in 2001, I recreated the group, rebranded the mailing list as the Yuricon mailing list, and this was the beginning of the use of the word Yuri to describe the genre here in the USA. So fans used shoujoi for many, many years to come. I began to shift my use and my communities towards Yuri because while it still had the connotation of porn in Japan, I wanted to reconnect the genre with the roots of it being connected to lesbians. And since Barozoku had the Yurizoku the area for lesbian room for them to talk, I wanted to reconnect that. So now I just needed to convince everybody else to join me. So that's where we were. In the early 2000s, when I went to go to my first ever Comiket, which was in 2002, in fact, there was no way to find lesbian themed comics, simply. Comic catalogs, and if you've been to Comiket, you know I'm talking about, they're like this thick. They're these massive books. They're organized geographically, vaguely by location, within the halls, and then by block. And then, the blocks are organized sort of by content. So you could find that it's pretty easy to find, say, well, now it would be like Demon Slayer section is this massive, huge section. And so it's pretty easy to find. Once you got a catalog, you could kind of page through it. There was, in the early 2000s, a website called Small Call. Before Small Call, I was looking for terms like onadoshi, ona ex ona, ononoko no ex ononoko, or the really horrible Dansei Kinshi, which I actually always loathe. And generally speaking, and I want to make this very clear, if you see a Yuri manga that says Dansei Kinsei or Dansei Kinshi, it's usually porn. It's literally the parting of the gauze curtain. It's like, no man allowed. So of course, who's going to buy it, right? But in 2000, a woman got together with some friends and created on her Small Call, created the Yuri Taisaku, list, which is a means for finding Yuri at the comic markets. And this was the first time anybody had organized that ever. So I was able to go to this list, find all the circles I wanted, sort of figure out where they were, and then triangulate around them, because not every every circle was going to make it. So that was really good. So in Yuricon, so that means by 2001, we now had Yuri being used for the genre in Japan and in the US. But in 2003, things started to shift. We had Yuricon, our first Yuricon event, and Yuri Shimai launched. When Yuri Shimai launched, it was only around for 2 years, then it canceled. Everything got moved over to 2005 to Ichijinsha, and it got relaunched at our Yuricon 2005 in Tokyo event. Yuri Shimai was relaunched as Yuri Hime, and the publisher at the time said to us, well, what do we think of the name? We went, it's okay. And that's fine. So with the continued existence of Yuri Hime as a quarterly, then bi-monthly, and now since 2017 monthly, you might assume that Yuri becomes the preferred genre term, and that really never happened. So manga publishers in Japan, attempting to shape this new genre for themselves, chose another name. And not surprisingly, they chose Girls Love. Boys Love was well established. It had peaked in the early 2000s as a really massive money-making genre. So of course the publishers, when they are trying to come up with a way to categorize this stuff, they pick Girls Love. It makes perfect sense. It's exotic because of course Japanese people want to use English the same way Americans want to use Japanese and create that in language. So what do we have here? So we have Girls Love still to this day can be found in editorial copy on Obi's. Some series still are described as Girls Love. You'll see on the top right hand, you have a perfect example. This is Otome no Teikoku, and it's Danshi Kinsei, and also Girls Love no Sekai. So it's all the things. As you can imagine, it's written by a guy, and it's written for largely a male audience in a magazine for men. So it has all the hallmarks of, it's about girls. It's totally a girls' world, men forbidden. So who's it for? Right? It's for men. There you go. So this was sort of interesting because whenever Your Eyes Meet came to America, in the Japanese version, it's a Yuri anthology. That's the actual title, is it's like no Aotabi or whatever. I don't remember the title, but it's a Yuri anthology. And I spoke to the creators because they have it as a woman's love. Well, they have the girls' love anthology, and I said, why? Why would you do that? Why would you call it girls' love? It's Yuri. And they said, well, we're in the business of translating. And I said, I understand. And they said, well, we translate boys love. I said, no, you don't. You use boys love. If it's an anthology that's boys love, you use boys love. And they're like, well, it's called boys love. I'm like, right. And this is called Yuri. And we had a very heated discussion about that. But they went with a women's love anthology, which is equally as awkward. So that's fine. I'm perfectly happy with that. So as the turn of the decade into the 2000s approached, no Japanese publishers were using the word Yuri, but Fandom was using it a lot. And the company that to first actually recognize Yuri as a genre was J-Manga. J-Manga launched in 2010. They had their multi-country online manga platform by the same name. And they arose as a strategic alliance between Crunchyroll and Bitway, and was backed by publishers that formed the Japanese Digital Comics Association. And I was involved with translating some of their manga. We at ALC Publishing got to do their Japanese manga translation for the Yuri category, and they allowed, well, actually it was one of our things was you need better categories because it's impossible to find stuff. I think that's actually true right now. A lot of anime and manga sites are really, really bad at categorizing stuff. And I brought this up again with Bookwalker, and I think they did a really good job. So since 2011, you have seen Yuri being used as a category, and you're starting to see since 2012 it in Japanese and English language bookstores that carry Japanese manga. So the genre has a name at last. What do the fans call themselves? And this is sort of an interesting conversation we had. So I'm at 2014, James and I are in Yokohama to celebrate, to attend Girls Love Fest. And we're walking along, looking at the Stojinshi market. And James asked me a question that I had never once considered. He said, what are Yuri fans called? Well, of course, he's thinking in terms of BL fans have Fujoshi and now Fudanshi. And we had talked about Yuri Danshi, though he had done a great article for Eureka magazine about Yuri Danshi and how male fans of Yuri manga would have this sort of other name for themselves. But here's the thing about Yuri Danshi. I think that particular manga was meant to make fun of male fans. I mean, it's obviously meant to be a comedy, but I do think they do some really important stuff there. But also, I think part of what Yuri Danshi Yuri Danshi manga was for was to make the male readers of Yuri Hime feel a little bit uncomfortable about themselves, which kind of, if you were a lesbian reading Yuri Hime, you might occasionally go, I'm not really comfortable with this. So I jokingly, at the time, I saw a friend of mine had done a doujinshi called Yurinin about being pregnant as a lesbian couple. And I said, well, I kind of think Yurinin wouldn't be a bad idea. Like, let's call ourselves something. So at the time I said to him, Yuri fans is acceptable. That's fine. So in 2019, just 2 years ago, Comic Yuri Hime tried to do this too. They were like, oh, we'll call ourselves Hime Danshi or Hime Joshi. And fans were like, no, because first of all, that's about the magazine, not about Yuri. But also, and I think this is a really key point, at this point in 2019, as we were celebrating the 100 years of Yuri, the fandom of Yuri, the creator base of Yuri is so diverse. It's men, it's women, it's non-binary, it's ex-gender, it's anybody. And they're creating Yuri for anybody. So I had said since day one that Yuri was for anyone who loves Yuri. And here was the Yuri fan base looking at Yuri Hime going, yeah, no. And this is the important point. So I said at the time, how about Yuri people? Yurijin. And when I wrote this on my blog, I got some interesting pushback from a Japanese commentator who suggested Yurizuki. Now, Yurizuki had come out like back in 2010 or 11, there'd been a short bit there. It was around the time Onozuki was really popular in common information. So Yurizuki was back. And so I kind of did the little research and found that not as many people were using Yurizuki as that person would think. So I'm saying Yurijin. We are people from the country of Yuri. So here we are. We can't draw too many conclusions from, how many people use a word online. And of course, this is the most important thing. Language changes, right? Language changes over time. It changes over need. Publishers, creators, and fandom will always be at odds with Yuri because we are completely heterogeneous. And I expect that 20 years from now, I don't know what we're going to be calling it. It's certainly not what we called it 20 years ago, but that's what we're calling it right now. And I hope, honestly, that I'll be around at least then to talk about it. So, and that's the end of my presentation. Yay. So thank you. I like Yurijin. Don't you like Yurijin? I think it's easy and it makes sense and it's fun and it's non-gendered. Because man, do I just really don't think we need to gender fandom, right? I think we're past that. So thank you all. So, okay, do you have any questions about my thing? Specifically, if you have any questions, I will do my, yes, James.
Hi, sorry.
Hi, James.
It's been such a long time. I wonder if you might talk a little bit more about what you think the role, so like labels, like how global fans or English speaking fans might continue to influence the use of labels in Japan? Like how attuned do you think? Because I mean, you said, you know, at your event in 2005, Yurihime was actually launched, right? And so you've got your event, which started this in 2003 in New Jersey. At the same year, there was also a Yuri event in Tokyo for the first time. So like, kind of, I'm curious about how much of the English fandom is going back into shaping anything going on in Japan.
This is a really interesting thing because the person who actually made that happen was Rika Takashima, who's here today. She actually set up Yuricon 2005 in Tokyo, and I just sort of came along for the ride and was super jet lagged and effed up the entire time. And she was really wonderful and fabulous. So Rika made that possible, and she used her contacts within Yuri fandom. And I think, you know, Hagiwara-san, right? Hagiwara Mami. So that's somebody that Rika knew. And so she got some contacts and brought in the guests. And I think that was really kind of why that all happened. She was really the moving factor. But also, I think in that particular case, I acted as a weird mascot. Because of my foreignness, it made an attraction like, oh, okay, this person who is not us is making these decisions. And in fact, that's a conversation that Patty and I have had quite a few times, is that her memory of how we chose Yuri and my memory are not the same. One of the questions I was asked at Yuricon 2005, in what I consider to be the part that I remember the least, because it was basically 2.5 hours of people grilling me with questions, and I was completely hardly in there, was what do you define Yuri as? And we were talking at the time about shoujo Yuri and shonen Yuri, or seinen Yuri and josei Yuri, and talking about how like for men and for women, following the demographic genres. And I joked at the time, whatever I like is Yuri. And I was joking, but it was only half joke, because the bottom line is, and I didn't talk about this in my presentation, but I really do want to say this, that I have 2 definitions for Yuri. One is our Yuricon definition, which is any story that has lesbian characters, content, themes, issues, and intense relationships between women that maybe don't necessarily have a definition, would be defined loosely under ski or some other bond. As Yuricon goes, that's Yuri, right? So you were saying that I might define something as Yuri that other people define as lesbian. And in fact, on Okazu, I have a completely different definition that I use for my daily life, which is if it's lesbian content without lesbian identity, it's Yuri. And if it's lesbian identity, then it's lesbian. Which is not to say that the one can't be the other and there isn't a fungibility and fluidity between those. It's just that if somebody hands me a book and it says happy lesbians in love, I might say, yes, this is Yuri too, but it's clearly LGBTQ, it's lesbian, you know, it's got identity. And if somebody hands me a book that looks exactly the same and just says happy days together, well, then we'd say it's Yuri, right? So, so there's this fluidity. And one of the artists I really like the best is Takumi Jin. And one of the reasons I love her work is because she does Yuri manga with lesbian identity. She has characters identify as lesbian and use lesbian slang or talk about, you know, koshi no ke or soshi no ke. And those kinds of things are very interesting to me. Yeah. So, so I think that it's a multi-part conversation. I think it was Rika's influence and the right time and the right place in 2005. But also I think me being the wrong person and the wrong age and the wrong country and the wrong everything kind of always makes an influence. I'm a weird bull in a china shop, because if I'm sitting with a bunch of people at Yuri 10 and talking to Kawamoto-san from Karakawa, and he is the guy who knows more about Yuri than even I do. Like, he is definitely the Yuri master, and I am like the American Yuri master. You know, we're sitting there talking about this stuff, and he's got contacts and I've got contacts. And I was talking with Murashima and we're talking about this old school stuff. And it's just that I'm a catalyst because I'm not, and I'm different, I'm other. I think it's that, but also I think fandom now is very global. And I think that Bookwalker has made a big difference. People can write and go, more of this, please, in English. And they go, okay, let's get more of this. So I think things have changed over time too. Nikki, you have another question.
I do, yes. So I love you're talking about the labels because I use Yuricon a lot because of
I know
you.
you do, and I appreciate that.
Yes, and actually, for the first time recently, little side story, I submitted an article to, I think it was Anime News Network, where I use Yuricon and I didn't qualify it or define it. I just left it in.
Nice.
And the editor was just like, yep, that's fine. So
Yep.
it tracks. But I know you talked about Yurizuki and Yuricon. I'm wondering if you could talk about, I think there's another word that was in discussion at the time, Yuribito, something like that. I might not be pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, Yuribito, right. So what happened was on Twitter, I said Yuricon, and somebody immediately came back, well, what about Yuribito? So here's the thing about Bito, right? I'm not a native speaker, but I really like words. And I started looking into Bito. And as far as I could tell, it's really used, I'm going to say this wrong, I'm going to make an enemy, I'm going to be wrong here, but it's used as a function. Bito is a person who is doing something. You're a Murabito, you're a villager, you're a traveler. It's for like Tabi Bito. As far as I can understand, Bito is used as, this is a person functioning as a thing, doing a job or a function. And Jin, if you think about, if we all say I'm America Jin or Nihon Jin or, any other kind of Jin, you're saying you're from the country of, right? You're a person of this thing. So I kind of chose Yuri Jin. Well, first of all, I think it scans beautifully. I think it's easy and it scans well. So I like that. But also we're not functioning it's not a function of Yuri, it's where we live is kind of how I envision it, if that makes sense. And again, the words are going to change, and they're going to change without me. I can't fix people. I can't make people do what I want. But that's kind of my idea of what Yuricon is versus Yuribito, if that makes any sense. Serena, you have a question for us.
Yeah. I had to write this down. So I have a curious question. There's been an increase of popularity of GL webtoons over the years. It started around I think the hype started around 2016.
Yeah, it's
when Lesin Comics released What Does the Fox Say, and ever since then, everything just there's been new titles of GL released in Korea and stuff and all. So
Thailand and the Philippines.
Thailand, yes.
I would say actually the Philippines, as you know, is really right up there because Imagine Demon Queen and Godly's work is amazing.
Yeah. Related to my question, do you think this is the next big thing for the Yuri and GL fandom?
Yes, and we can tell you why, and Nikki knows the answer to this. Kanagawa announced this week on Bookwalker that they're doing they're reformatting some of their Yuri manga for webtoon style. So bing, 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 there you go. They know who their competition is.
Yay!
So yeah, absolutely. I agree. Web comics are the thing. And Kanagawa, the thing about Kanagawa you have to understand is they know their business. Watch what Kanagawa does. They're excellent. They market the hell out of every series they own. They do goods like nobody's business. They do events because they run the Yuri 10. So yeah, I would say 100% webtoons is where we are at because we're all walking around with phones. Sean, you have a question?
Hang on, trying to unmute myself.
Yeah,
one of the things talking about the popularity of Yuri these days as compared to say 20 years ago, and I think one of the ways that you can really tell how popular it's become is that nowadays you can have series with 2 women or more with strong female friendships and not have people immediately pairing them constantly. Whereas, you know exactly what series I'm thinking about, Erica.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, 15, 16 years ago on the Yuricon mailing list, we would have been all over
All
this.
over
There
it.
would have been.
Absolutely.
I actually think
Absolutely.
it's a very good thing that
I do
that
too.
you can have this sort of thing where you don't have to push everyone into that role or into that genre.
No, I agree. And I think that it does speak to the popularity of Yuri. I think that's actually a really good point when we can have more diversity in relationships between women. And this is really a huge thing, right? I want to talk about this. Back in the day, the rule was if there were two girls on the screen in the same frame at the same time, it was Yuri. Like that
Yep.
was it. Like, and honestly, that was a lot of people really do think that. There's a lot of readers and anime watchers out there who don't have women in their lives, and there's only two relationships in their heads, right? Your friends or your lovers, and there's like, and friendship is only like a really small box, but we have more subtlety. I want to get a question from Kaylin real quick here on the side, and then I'll get you Verena and Frank. Kaylin says, why Yuri can't have identity. Now, it's not that Yuri can't have lesbian identity, it's that as a label, if something identifies as lesbian, you tend to call it lesbian or queer or gay or LGBTQ or whatever label term you want. So if you go into a bookstore and you were to find a book about a novel for lesbians, you're going to find it probably in the lesbian category, the LGBTQ section. Whereas if you're going for a Yuri manga, it's Yuri. It makes more sense if you just think that it's not that Yuri can't have lesbian identity, is that if it does, it then also becomes a queer book or a lesbian book, if that makes sense. So it's not like it can't. Of course it can. And that's obviously what I've been pushing for all these years. Verena, you have a question or a comment?
Yes, actually, I wanted to ask you all about your thoughts. I had the impression that Comic Yurihime used to be very attuned to what the fans were thinking, and from your presentation, I took it like they are not so attuned to them right now, like with the Himedanshi, Himejoshi stuff. And do you think that, I don't know, maybe the editorial stuff is too, I don't know, conservative or too old, or I don't know, not too online?
I think they have their own needs. Let's put it that way. I don't think that they're out of tune because, of course, like all Japanese magazines, they do every issue. They have a survey, and I have filled out the survey, and they've even sent me stuff sometimes. Sometimes I win the thing. But the thing is, editorial departments of magazines have the needs of editorial departments of magazines. So I think that they were promoting their magazine primarily. They weren't thinking about it really. They weren't necessarily caring. Now they're actually pretty good. They do have a page in the back where they talk about other things they're reading and watching that might be of interest to their audience. And they do have their surveys, and you can see what becomes popular and what becomes not popular. Clearly somebody there likes citrus and also Yuri, because those have continued for very, very long. And they're not asking me about those things. So, but I'm not the fandom. And so maybe I would assume that they're in touch with their audience, honestly. But Hime Joshi and Hime Danshi just looked. Frank, let's have your question.
Yeah, so I put this in chat, but I'll repeat it here. My interest is in the larger social, economic, cultural, et cetera, trends, especially around gender roles and how that might relate to the growth of Yuri fandom. So I'm actually interested in your commentary on that for all three panelists.
Okay, you know what? Let's do that. Let's move away from my presentation because we have a bunch of questions for panelists, and I want to go back to the first one. We're gonna handle Frank's, then I want to go back to Sarah's, and then I think we have another one here. So, all right. So Verena and James, you are open to discussing this, and if either of you would like to take Frank's question, why don't you go ahead and jump in? James, maybe you have any thoughts on that?
I'm rereading what he wrote in the chat. So it's a really interesting question, but it's also really hard to answer because, like, how do you measure that? How do you establish a relationship? There are a lot of people who have said that BL has played a role in the acceptability of gay men or LGBT people in Japan. And it makes sense that that Yuri would have some role in it, but again, as Yuri is more minor and it's got a smaller fan base, it would probably have less of an impact. But at the same time, if you look at, again, the overlapping fandoms, there's probably some sort of relationship. But in terms of, I'm not really sure what you're asking in terms of like the socioeconomic
I think to
aspect.
clarify, I'm not really talking about the, I'm really talking about a causal arrow that's flowing from the socioeconomic cultural trends into the growth of Yuri fandom, not the reverse.
Okay, so
let me answer that a bit. To some extent, the answer is going to be yes and no, and I don't know, and maybe, but I want to say that this is some piece of it, and I'm gonna claim this chunk of it. So back in the day when Yuricon was being developed, I was speaking to one of our Japanese guests, and she said, "How do we know that we're not going to get like creepy dudes at Yuricon?" And I said, "Because I'll kick them out." And that was actually really important because at the time I was sort of establishing the boundaries for what Yuri fandom is. Now it's much bigger than me and I would never claim it. But at the time I was like, this is not Danshi Kinsei. Like, this is for women and for men and for, at the time we didn't have Gender X, but we had people who knew they were non-binary, they just didn't necessarily have a word for it. So it was for a queer fandom, but it was also for everybody. And by establishing that at the beginning, that Yuricon spaces, which were mostly the main Yuri fandom, and Shoujo Archive with Phillips, that they were for anybody who wanted, that meant that you had people who felt free to come out, free to be who they were. And even now I get questions from folks who are like, are trans women okay? I'm like, of course, women are women. I mean, trans women are women. I mean, yes, these spaces are always being defined by whoever's running the show. And as long as I'm running the show, there is a very strong openness to queer fandom. But that's not going to account for what's going on in Japan. So what's going on in Japan? When you look at, if you walk around Comitia, I think is actually even a better choice, or Girls Love Festival, or any of the Yuri sections, what you see every year is they get bigger, they get queerer, and they get, I don't want to say less otaku, but less conventionally otaku spaces. When I first started going to Comiket back in 2002, you had like me online with all the dudes, right? And it was like we were all getting the whatever manga. And by the time I went to Comiket the very last time, it wasn't like that anymore. It was just people were standing around chatting. I mean, that's the thing that I think was amazing. The last time I went to Comitia, which was in 2019, was people stood around talking with other people on the lines, behind the table. I mean, like there was just there's been a sea change of how otaku life is perceived. And yeah, of course, there's still the conventional, super, tightly wound, not talking. When I went to go see the Mari Mita movie with Bruce those years ago, we were the first two people online to get in the theater, and two otaku literally cut us off to get into the elevator first so they could be tickets number 1 and 2. And I'll never forget that because they were hilarious. And the one guy held his backpack and kept looking around furtively, and we all agreed he's got the bomb. Like, there's no, like, that kind of thing exists. It's always going to exist. And I don't think we're pushing it out, but there's other spaces are being carved around that. And I think this Yuri fandom is a good case for, and BL fandom, a good case for queer people carving out spaces for themselves where they were the topic. Like I see that with BL too. Like back in some years ago when you had queer guys who were queer BL fans, they were being crowded out. Like, this isn't for you, which I think is just the worst sentence in the world. This isn't for you. It's about you. It's using you, but it's not for you. That doesn't happen really anymore. You don't see that. You see BL fans who are men, who are women, who are non-binary, who are trans, and you see that with, and I am sure James has seen that very well, particularly in non-Japanese spaces out here where we don't have necessarily those same rules about who goes to events. So
Yeah.
I think it's all sort of, again, everything's fungible. You know, it's like, which comes first, the sexual identity or the fandom? Like, who knows? Like, it's kind of, you know.
Well, it's a parallel phenomenon, I think was what you're saying.
I think it's actually
It's
intertwined.
synergistic.
Yeah, it is. Verena, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the situation in Germany, and like I said, the German manga boom started in the late 1990s with Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon, and especially Sailor Moon was very, very popular among girls. And I think especially Haruka and Michiru and their relationship was super, super popular and is still super, super popular. And I think that not few people realized they were queer with the help of those two characters. So I think that played an important role. And I know that there is there are quite a few queer people at German events around manga and anime. So if that is lesbian or gay people, transgender people, non-binary people. So that's always very present also as creators actually of original German language manga or manga inspired comics, whatever you may call it. And I think maybe also that the presence of boys' love and to a certain extent maybe also girls' love on the manga market helped to maybe bring a bit more like queer comics and also queer novels to Germany, maybe. So I remember that in the 1990s and early 2000s, there was no queer book table in a German bookstores. And recently I've seen quite a few actually, and not just during Pride Month. So I think there is something moving on the market. And I think that manga contributed to that because like I said, and like I showed, manga is super popular and manga sells a lot. And there are so many people who love manga and it's not really, not a niche fandom anymore.
Right. And money talks. I think that's the thing we haven't said yet that we need to say. Money talks. So when Seven Seas started picking up BL and Yuri manga and they were doing well, it talked. It spoke to them and they started picking up more. And once one company is doing well, what's going to happen? Every other company jumps on that ship. So when you can see that one company is successful at a thing, that's going to make a difference with the publishers. And again, what fans need, what creators want, and what publishers want are all different things, but there's a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram when it comes to money. So there's that. And I want to circle back real quick. Thank you, Frank. That was a great question. I want to circle back. Sarah had a question and it's really complicated. I want to see if anybody has any thoughts. Sarah writes, talking about specifically citrus, and since Verena, you and I at least are familiar with citrus, she says, I have only a general familiarity with it, but I have the general impression that it's a toxic relationship. So please correct me if this is addressed at some point. Do you think Yuri has a responsibility to potential queer readers to either show healthier relationships or address it in some constructive way that makes it evident that what is happening is not something to want in a real life relationship, or does it, being fantasy, generally give it a pass? In this case, she talks about like similar to complaints about 50 Shades of Grey. Well, since we have the translator into German right here, I'm just curious, Verena, what do you think about how citrus portrays? Because I have very, very clear ideas about this. So I would like to hear your ideas. Do you feel that citrus should or should not, or does not represent the relationship in a way that is good for readers or is useful to readers?
Yeah, like I remember that I had a lot of problems with translating the series because like maybe I wouldn't call it toxic, but that's more like because I'm not really familiar with what's implied with a toxic relationship. Like that's a term that I'm not so familiar with, and also not from experience. So it's a bit hard for me to apply these general concepts to fiction. But I remember when I translated the series that it was really hard for me to tell what was going on in May's mind. And I thought, like, she is the second main character. And we never get to hear about what her thoughts are, what she thinks about.
There's no interiority in her at all. She's completely
yeah. And at one point she writes this weird letter to Yuzu, and I translated it and I thought, like, I'm not getting what you're saying. I'm sorry, you're using weird sentences and words, and there was at least one sentence that made no sense grammatically, and like I was confused, and I'm still confused. Like I said, we're now at spin-off volume number 3 or 4, and we're waiting for number 4, and I feel like the story is over, and like Saburota as an author is not saying anything anymore about the relationship. She's just saying, yeah, well, it's a happy relationship. I don't know, it's not really that happy. Like, they're not talking to each other. They are supposedly to be a happy couple, but they are not having like any conversations about what they want and what they envision. And it's just like Yuzu has ideas and May probably has ideas, but it's still not talking about what she thinks and wants, and it's frustrating, really.
So I want to say about citrus. So back when I was at Yuricon, they had art on the walls, and one of the pictures was Yuzu and May, and I stood there in the middle of Yuricon, surrounded by all these Japanese fans of Yuri, going, "Look at this face! It's miserable." Like, to me, they just look miserable all the time, and I feel like that's the appeal. I feel like that's actually the appeal. The entire story is designed to be forbidden, and it's not. But it's like, look how unhappy they are. Look at that face they're making. They're hiding themselves. Look at, like, the whole story is designed to be like tee hee hee, which means like I can't even. But I want to say that I feel like the question, Sarah, is really complicated because you're basically asking, what is the function of fiction? Does fiction have a purpose? Does fiction have to tell you how to deal with this? And in this particular case, I'm going to say no. Citrus is a train wreck. It is a burning garbage dumpster fire, and you're supposed to enjoy it for that and not for anything else. So just like 50 Shades, yes, 50 Shades shows BDSM it's not realistic, it's not healthy, but what was it for? Was it to teach people good boundaries? Does fiction have to justify itself, or can it just be trash fires sometimes? And I kind of think, personally, that I don't think Yuri or any form of fiction has any obligation to teach people anything. If a writer wants to, of course, they may, and that's fine. But I don't think there's an obligation. And I'm gonna say every author and every publisher and everybody is gonna have a different take on this. You know, every reader has a different take on it. You might look at it and go, why not tell me don't do this? But on the other hand, as a writer, I might go, do I really have to? Look at them, they're miserable. Like, I should not have to tell you that. Like, look how unhappy they look. Look how they have no thoughts. There's no interior. They're literally hollow shells of misery. Like, you know, so I think that's a really complicated question. It could be like a 3-hour discussion about the nature of fiction, honestly. but it was a great question. I have
like
a good question here. I want to answer really quick because this is one where I won't talk for 20 minutes. Where does the term shakaijin from? In Japanese, shakai is society. So shakaijin is people, I say it's like a wage slave. They're just productive members of society. So shakaijin Yuri is Yuri in the workplace, out in life, not home, not in school, but just sort of out in life. So that's an easy one. Let's see. I'm just seeing if there's any other good questions. All right. I had that one. Frank's question. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes, Ashley, by all means, please.
Hey, I'm afraid this is probably just for Verena. I just wondered, do you have any kind of, other than stuff that's already out in Japanese when you're translating, and you mentioned coming up against words who are like, okay, if I translate this 2 volumes on, this could change what could happen. Do you have any like vehicle where you can say, excuse me, depending on what I put down right now, in 2 volumes, this isn't going to make sense to like directly to the people who will be making those decisions? Do you have a contact, or are you literally just flying as what's available in Japanese?
Yeah, I don't have a contact, unfortunately. So I have a few contracts that explicitly say if I ever contact the original author, I will be fired and I will never get other work from that publisher. So yeah, I can't ask them. I can just hope that maybe they address this issue on Twitter, but usually they don't. So like, I can search around online and see what other fans may be thinking if I'm lucky enough and somebody said something. And I can hope that another volume has already been published and maybe that addresses the issue. But yeah, if I'm translating the newest volume, I'm like, yeah, sorry, could be this, could be that, or maybe something else entirely. I'm not sure. Yeah, and sometimes, it does happen that I'm like, oh, if I had known that at the time, I would have translated this completely differently, and I'm so mad, and there won't be like another edition, and now I have to keep it, and why? It's frustrating.
Patty asks, do you ever read ahead in a series to find out?
I try not to. Like, for example, I'm translating Yona of the Dawn also into German, and I have translated volume number 32 recently, and I haven't read ahead yet because I'm thinking like, yeah, I don't want to know yet what's happening because I like want to go with the flow of the story. But what other stuff was there? Oh yeah, like I had the manga for X-Arm. You might remember that train wreck of an anime at Crunchyroll. And there I knew the ending when I translated like volume 10 or so. So it depends a bit on the manga. Like if I like it a lot, I don't read ahead because like I want to keep the excitement. But if it's like, oh, this manga is so horrible, I just want to know how it ends and hope there's a good ending to work towards. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I actually had a real quick story. A friend of mine is a translator, and she did a very well-known manga where it went on for a number of volumes, and a decision that had been made early on, which had nothing to do with her choice particularly, turned out ultimately to be the wrong choice. And that was because the creator had an idea that was much further ahead, and they didn't give you any clue as to how that was going to happen. So I think that to some extent that might be on the author, not the translator. But translators have a rough job because, as we've talked about, a number of you have commented about how translating from one language to another, you're also translating from one culture into another, and you can miss a lot of things. So yeah, that's fine. Kaylin has asked if we could share our presentations. Kaylin, this is actually going to go up eventually on YouTube, so you'll be able to grab everything. But if Verena and James, you want to share your presentations with me, I can make space for them on Yuricon in our essays page. If you're comfortable doing that. If you don't want to, I will understand. And somebody's commenting that Nikki's commenting that the translators get a lot of flack. So thank you for your excellent work, Verena. We all appreciate it. All right, Sarah, you have another question. Let's have it.
I'm so sorry.
You're not allowed to apologize. You're fine.
So I'm interested in learning more about the LGBTQ language in Japanese, like what words are used within the community. Do you think that Yuri is a good source for finding that kind of language or not?
Not really.
No.
So here's the thing. One, how queer people talk about themselves and how fans talk about queer people are on the Venn diagram is very, very barely on top of each other. Also, Yuri, because of the translation and the licensing and everything else, it tends to be running behind things. So there's a lot more slang. Slang changes all the time. You know this. Slang changes. People are constantly shifting how they're talking about them. So there are books right now in Japanese about LGBTQ. I'm sorry I didn't bring one of them in here. I'm actually reading one right now by Pellet Talk. It's a queer NGO, and they have an Instagram, Pellet Talk. It's PALETTALK, I think. But Pellet Talk is a group that's online, and they have a book out right now that's about talking about LGBTQ people and issues and things of interest. And I kind of really like it for what they're saying is about, like, how to use words that don't hurt. Like saying, you know, like basically don't use homo anymore. It's gone out of fashion kind of thing. Oh, hey, my wife brought it for me. Yay, here it is. Let's go here. Okay. So it is Palette Talk. And it's a wonderful book because basically, if you're in school, if you're in the workplace, what can you say? Like, homo was a thing that, like, into the 2010s, people were saying, I know gay men were saying homo about themselves.
Mhm.
But they're saying, you know, now maybe don't use that. That would be really uncool. Like, you know, so I think at this point, what you really want to probably do, and there's an easy way to do this. I'm going to try to make this as easy as possible. I have a Twitter list of Japanese LGBTQ plus groups. So it's my Twitter list is queer Japanese groups, and you can follow it and then see how those people are talking about themselves and you can ask them directly rather than asking us, because I mean, while James is in Japan and probably can talk to this a little bit, and I'm going to ask him to take over in a second, I'm not. So James, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sorry, I was buying that book you just
Oh, is it? It's wonderful. It's really,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. I'm going to say, honestly, I like Palette Talk. They have a lovely Instagram. They're really nice on Twitter, and I like it so far a lot.
Okay, so I just missed the header of the question. So you're wanting more information about LGBTQ groups?
No, how queer folks in Japan are talking about themselves. Is Yuri a good way to learn that? And I said no.
Oh, no, yeah.
If I can clarify slightly,
Sure.
I guess it is how they're talking about themselves, but like specifically how in the Japanese language, queer people may speak differently, kind of like from a socio-linguistic kind of standpoint. Are they using the Japanese language in any kind of different ways that you could sources to hear like authentic talk and language use by queer people?
Okay. If you're interested in sociolinguistics, you might want to check out the writing of Claire Marie. Her surname is spelled Maree. She has a book called Queer Queen, and she's looking at media in general. And she is actually looking at how at least queer people in the media, and this, I don't think she looks at manga. It's on my to read list. Well, it's on a stack of books that I have to read. But I mean, she does break down like language use and stuff. So if you're looking for that, I don't know to what extent there's like a stereotypical lesbian way of speaking in Japanese, in the same way that there is kind of queenie speech among gay men, but it's mostly performative. So I'm not sure how much that would show up in Yuri, even if they were trying to do that. But again, the majority of Yuri is supposed to be schoolgirls. So, I mean, or if it's shakaijin or whatever, they're, yeah, most of it's not identitarian. So it's not
No,
trying to represent lesbians, like self-identified lesbians. So you probably aren't going to get that kind of language, even.
that's why I like Takamiya Jin's work for that, because she does include at the time of when she's writing how people talk about each other. And actually I've seen, I don't honestly to this day, I honestly have no idea what I was reading, but I was reading like seconds ago, hours ago, something that was talking using the word Reba. And I think it actually is in Komikiri Hime. So maybe they're starting to, some of their sexy manga, some of their like, lesbian escort service manga, or one or two, they have a couple of people who are using like some lesbian terms, but it's artificial. Like it's not, that's why I say talk to the NGOs,
Right.
because that's how people are
So,
talking about themselves to themselves, as opposed to letting Yuri manga teach you. It's like, honestly, it's exactly the same as, can I learn Japanese through anime? Yeah, but you're going to learn really weird Japanese. Bottom line.
yeah. But I mean, I don't know if there's anything, something like Rika Takashima's, like the manga behind you. Because it's cute, but it is like lesbian identified characters. But I don't, what is there like that now? I mean, that's from a long time ago, so the language has shifted.
There are, and yeah, well, that's just it. Like Takamijian does have lesbian characters in her Yuri, and they do use lesbian slang. But I am gonna say that I don't think, even when they're adults, like I think adults are definitely a thing right now, and you're getting more manga about adults in the world, and some lesbian identified ones. There's a lot of like short stories, like some of the, like, you get women in bars talking, but they're really not, it's not lesbian life, but also lesbian life isn't lesbian life, because there isn't a bar culture anymore, really, hardly. Even in America, like bar culture has kind of gone away. People are online and talking. So absolutely, I would say if you want to know how people are talking, talk to the folks who are the NGOs where they're folks who are talking to each other, and see if they have specific language around themselves. Hopefully that's a good help. Do we have any other questions from anybody? I don't see anything in the, oh, thank you, Sarah, so much for having hung out with us.
She might be gone now.
Oh yes, Ashley, go ahead.
You on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yes, mostly for James, I guess, but it's like, so when you do your slide checking down of what's around in events, what is exactly are you looking for in order to find the information that you need?
You mean like globally?
Well, that's the thing. Is it stratified so that you can put it all together, or do you is it just wherever you go, you come up with what you think is interesting to check then and there?
Oh wait, so
in surveying,
events,
sorry, yeah, when you're surveying and when you ask people, do you have like a set of questions that you always ask, or are you? Is it just generally bespoke to where you're going?
No, because when I originally started this, it was just sort of kind of an interesting little side project that I wasn't taking super seriously, like at the very beginning. But then Professor Fujimoto decided to apply for a research grant, so we got a little bit more formal. But it's overwhelming to go to these events, because I always say that I'm not a fan, but I'm a fan of Fandom. But I mean, there's all this beautiful artwork and everybody's so excited, and I love festivals, and these are festivals, and it's overwhelming, and it's hard for me to do like really serious like research. Occasionally we've had organizers who are friends or acquaintances, and they've arranged for us to meet and interview a couple of key people or things like that, that's worked out. But it quite often it's not possible, or it's not realistic. So I don't, when I go, like, I'm looking, I go to any table and I buy something, because it's kind of rude to start asking questions and not buying anything. And so, I buy something and then I start asking a few questions, we just chat, and then just say it, mostly it's just, can I have your card and can I contact you later? But I might ask like specific questions, like in the case I was asking or mentioning before, like, this work, this is at a BL event. Do you call this, do you think this is Yuri, or do you think this is lesbian, or do you, those sorts of things? But I'm not trained in that kind of research anyway, so it's not that kind of scientific thing. I'm mostly used to just doing archival work. I like going through, like going through 30 years of a magazine and looking for stuff. And so, yeah.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Sure.
Patty calls it seat of your pants research. But I think folks at the events are always surprised when, I don't want to say always surprised, but they're surprised when you show interest in their work. Like when you're just, because when I started going to the events, you would walk up, you'd say, mumble, 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 which meant, may I look at this? You'd look at the thing and you buy it or walk away. And it was very, so this Rika and I have this really great experience. We were at Comiket. It was selling ALC publishing manga, and people would mumble, 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 walk up. And I would say in very bad Japanese, yes, please look. And they would run away. And that was really funny. But what was extra funny was a few months later, we're in New York City for New York Comic Con, and Rika's with me at the Prism Comics table, and we're selling our work, and somebody would walk up and say, can I look at this, mumble, 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 and she'd say in English, yes, please look at it, and they'd run away, and the two of us would like fall apart all over each other, because otaku are the same, like everywhere you go. And the thing is, I think generally speaking, when you show interest in somebody's work at the tables, they're always really excited to talk to you about it, and they might not be able to have a lot of time, but they want to take a moment and be like, yeah, this is great, thank you. If you ask for an autograph or whatever, I always, no matter how small or cheap a copybook I buy, I always ask for an autograph. And it makes them so happy. Like, they're like, what? What is this thing you're doing? But I think if you ask people, they're really, fans are glad to talk about their fandom, I think, generally speaking. All right, well, we still have a few more minutes if anybody has any more questions. So thank you, Kayleen. I guess she's going to go. And that's an interesting comment. Nikki says she wonders if behavior will change now that more creators are doing streams and interactions. And that's kind of interesting. James, do you ever follow anybody who does like online free draws, or any of the VTubing?
I have not. I recently joined the 21st Century and got, what app is that? Discord. Yeah, Discord. I recently went on Discord, and an event that I went to in Malaysia has a really active, it was amazing event. And their Discord is really interesting, and they have gatherings like every week where they talk about, they have what they call coffee hour, and that sort of thing. So I follow that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So you follow the fandom there. Do any of that? Do you follow anybody on any of the VTubers or any of the live drawing or anything?
Oh, no. Sorry, not the live stuff. No.
No.
I mean, I think I've heard some rumors maybe that VTubers are like the next big thing for Yuri or something, but like, for me, this is already too alien. Like, I'm not on TikTok, and I don't follow VTubers, so I'm afraid I'm already too old for this fandom.
Yeah, we've all hit that moment. I do follow the VTubing a little bit, but I find it very boring most of the time. So that's just me. There's a problem. Like I get VTubing and I have a whole long rant about that. That's a different thing. I get why it would be appealing to fandom, but and I'm not dissing it in any way, but I do think creators interacting in new ways is kind of fun. That I'm 100% behind. James, we have a question from Louis. If he wants to know, and I suppose I should ask all of you this. Let's start with James and then Verena. Are you active on Twitter or another platform where we can stay up to date with your work, or at least you?
Yeah. So I replied in the chat, but yeah, I exist on Twitter as like James_Welker. But as I warned Louis, it's a lot of political rants and a little bit of research.
And
but if you click on that, that's, yeah. But if you click on that, you can also see I have another account which started out as a BL research account, but I've expanded it, and that is BL Media in Asia. It also started as just BL in Asia, and now I'm everything, but that's all research related. So if I publish anything, I will definitely announce it there.
And Verena, do you have any?
I'm very active on Twitter, unfortunately, mostly not related to Yuri. So you can find me under V_Arakawa. Arakawa is a river in Tokyo. And yeah, it's a weird mixture of German, English, Japanese, and Welsh tweets.
I love it. You're the only other person I've ever seen, other than my friends in Wales, who tweet regularly in Welsh. So.
I try my very best.
That's great.
And otherwise, I would point you to my website, which I try to update regularly, where you can find like an overview of stuff I've translated and also stuff I've published and talks I've given, mostly in German, but also in English. So like the website has a small section of English works with links as far as they're available. And I think that's the easiest way to keep up to date with what I'm doing. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. I can be found on Twitter at OkazuYuri, one word, OKAZUYURI. Also on Instagram, I have the world's worst Instagram, where I just take photos, literally phone photos of whatever I'm reading, and then make some comments about it. And of course, you find me on okazu.yuricon.com, where everything blah blah blah, and yuricon.com, where all our essays are, including one of Verena's. And I just want to say real quick, we have a comment from Nikki about the Big Bloom Into You Read Aloud Yuri VTubing stream, and it was only a couple nights ago, so that was really big. But what I did want to say about that one was, while it was very sweet and very cute, they actually really were very good about promoting the books. And that I thought was really key, because I think some of the VTubers I've seen have been more about promoting themselves than the content. So that's really good. And you also, Nikki, said a really good thing about having spoken to Shilin Huang online. Now you would talk to her differently at an event. I actually met her years ago at an event, and she's really approachable and nice. And that's something I'm going to actually recommend real quick. When the pandemic is over, if you can get to events, do. I mean, it might be really weird and awkward. Not all of us are really like big crowd people, but walk the artist alley. People really like to talk about their work, and you find some really cool stuff in the middle of the 17,000th BL version of whatever the shonen series of the day is. You can find really good original work, and which is what I'm really into, which is why I like Komitia better than Komicat. That's really good. And I think we're probably close to the end here. So I'm going to ask one more question. What are you working on right now? Where can we find your current research? What are you doing? What books are you translating, Verena? What books are you working on, James? Verena, why don't you go? Tell us what you're working on right now.
I am working on a few things. So, for example, this is Otisama to Neko, which is a very cute manga about an old man and his very fat cat, and it's very, very, like they say, iyashi, like soul healing manga. I love it. And I'm also working on the manga version of Kusuriya no Hitorigoto, which is like a fantasy series about a healer or something at the court of an emperor, and it's
Is
also
that a light?
a bit of,
There's a light novel of that, I think.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
The light novel
okay.
is the original, and that's the manga version.
And there's an anime of it too. It's like, I don't know, like a pharmacist in another world or something like that.
It's not isekai, and that's one reason to love it. And it's also a bit of a detective story, and yeah, it's great.
Cool. Excellent. And James, what are you working on these days?
I just finished going over the copy edits for the English version of a book on BL. Sorry, it's so much BL. I'm sorry.
No, don't. It's fine.
Yeah. So BL in Asia, which is going to come out from University of Hawaii Press next year. So it'll be out in May. There's a Japanese version that's slightly different content that came out in 2019, but so that's like the big thing that I'm working on right now. Yeah.
Excellent. And as you all may know, I'm working on By Your Side, the first 100 years of Yuri anime and manga, and that should be out next summer from Journey Press. We just got cover art from Rika Takashima, and it's awesome. Absolutely breathtakingly fabulous. So I'm really looking forward to that, and hopefully we'll be allowed out again to do visiting events and stuff, and so we can drop by and see everybody. Maybe I'll make that trip, that long-awaited trip to the Philippines finally, Serena. So
can't wait to meet you. Let us know.
I will absolutely do that. You know I will, because they have a huge, folks, the Philippines is a huge Yuri community, and it's really active. And Serena's right in there, and they're really good. You should definitely.
Yes, so far, like all the plans for Yuri GL Philippines is on hold right now due to the pandemic. But yeah, hopefully when all of this is over, we can finally do our yearly Yuri booth in Cosplay Mania, and hopefully we get to meet Yuri fans. And honestly, I miss the feeling like we did the Yuri booth 2018 and 2019, and like every time like somebody, like some people stops by our booth and check out our Yuri manga and Yuri merch that are available, like they either like they wanted to, you know, the feeling that they want to talk to you but they don't want to, they just like they want to buy the merch and then they just go. But I think the most memorable for me was like 2019, because there was this Yuri fan who stayed from the opening of our booth until the very end, like when everybody was like closing, like already packing up for the day. Like,
they wanted to vibe off of you, right?
Yeah, like he was like, this person was like talking about all the different Yuri series from past to present. Like, oh my God, it's like in the morning it was like a Yuri throwback, and then in the afternoon we're already talking about latest like series like Bloom Into You and stuff like that. And then this person has been like suggesting us stuff that we would want to do in the future and all that. But yeah,
I think just having a space to talk is so important. There's actually a couple of Yuri cafes in Japan that were absolutely on my list of places to eventually get to. There is a concept Yuri cafe. Verena, I will send you this just because I think you'll be very funny, where they only do like a couple events a year, where they actually do like, they are a Yuri school. It's not Maria Samagami through, it's more like Frou and Goth Loli, but they do a concept cafe event. And I was really disappointed that Yuri10 didn't do that. Like they totally should have done that. So they were actually kind of hoping to do that for the next one, but that got canceled. So I kind of feel like there's space for it, but pandemic. So when we're past the pandemic, hopefully with these things can, you know, we can reseed our lily garden. So, and I do want to say, yes, the Yuri GL Philippines group is an amazing group. And if you haven't followed them on Facebook, definitely please do that, because they are a great group. All right.
Thank you. So, thank you so much.
No, thank you for all your efforts. Do we have any other questions? Okay. then I am going to, well, reseed is a little, yeah, I said reseed the garden. Of course, the lilies are rebulb the garden. So there we go. Anyway, so thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Verena. You guys were fabulous as always. It was such an
So you.
incredible pleasure to have you all here to join us on this event. Happy 20th anniversary Yuricon. Happy Yuri to all of us. Thank you.